believe in the ripple effect.
What's up? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. Of course, I'm your host, Ricardo Randes, also known as Ricky Franson. A great episode for you today. Today we have returning guest and dear friend, historian, researcher, philosopher, author, Alex Krainer. And just like when I have all the regulars on, we're comfortable with each other. We have fun sharing all different types of stories and perspectives on so many different things. And this conversation is no different. We talk about a lot of our own personal lives, our upbringings, parenting, marriages, relationships, geopolitics, history, and everything in between. It's a really, really fun discussion. But as always, before we get into another fun discussion, let me remind you, this is a value for value show. If you're one of the many thousands and thousands of listeners who download and watch the Ripple Effect podcast on a regular basis, please consider giving some value back. You can rate, review, tell people about the show, post the show on any social media platforms you're on. And the simple act of leaving a review does go a long way with fighting against the algorithms that suppress shows and conversations like these. So there are plenty of great ways you can help support and grow the Ripple Effect podcast without financially supporting the show. But if you are in a good financial situation and you can afford to support the Ripple Effect podcast financially, even if it's just a little bit, please consider doing so. We have a Patreon page, and you can support us as little as $1 a month, and that does go a long way. No donation is too little. If 1% of the people who watch and listen to the Ripple Effect podcast donated as little as $1 a month, I could easily do the show full time, so please consider doing so. You can also send a one-time donation via Venmo or PayPal. And we also have an amazing merch store with tons of cool logos and designs, a lot of new ones. So please check out the Ripple Effect Podcast merch.com to go directly to the merch store, or you can go to the rippleeffectpodcast.com and find all the links to all our platforms, all our socials, all the ways to support in the show, and much more. Don't forget to also check out the Union of the Unwanted.com, which is a roundtable discussion show which I co-host with Sam Tripoli from the Tinfoil Hat Podcast, Charlie Robinson from Macroaggressions, and now the new owner of Activist Post, and then also Midnight Mike from the OBDM show. So if you like roundtable discussion shows with researchers, authors, doctors, celebrities, and other content creators, please check out the unionoftheunwanted.com to find all the platforms you can find that show. Finally, that's it. Enjoy this amazing conversation with Alex Krainer, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Peace. You too, my friend. How's everything?
Everything's good and a little bit insanely busy, but it's not all shit busy. Some of it is good busy.
Is it life stuff, work stuff, or everything?
Yes. Yeah, everything.
Yeah, well, it's better being busy than bored, right? I don't know how people can be bored ever, but I know with my kids, I'm always saying that. I'm like, let's keep them busy. I'm like, bored kids get in trouble, not busy kids. So we constantly have them doing something and sign up for something, playing futsal, soccer, basketball, everything in between, just to kind of,
Fantastic.
yeah. So it's fun, and then coaching. So and then I get to be a part of. I was just listening to a podcast recently. Actually, I think it was an interesting podcast. It was Patrick Bet-David and this guy Chase Hughes, I think is his name, and he specializes in like psychology and manipulation, and they talk about MK Ultra, they talk about Edward Bernays, they talk about all this stuff, and it sounds like he has a pretty crazy life. Was in the military, did all these special ops and whatnot, and then he's like, his biggest regret was working too much and not being around his family, and it's
That is, that's pervasive. A few weeks ago, I came across somebody's thread on X, and the guy went around uh, and interviewed random passersby in their 60s, 70s, 80s, like old people. It would ask them the same thing. What do you regret the most in your life? Practically everybody said the same thing. Too much running after money, career, work, jobs, and not enough time spent with people that matter in my life. It's practically every single person said the same thing. Um,
Well, it can be a curse because it's weird. It's like a gift and a curse figuring that out at a young age because
yeah,
for some reason I came to that realization at such a young age, and that I kept looking at things like, well, is that really worth my time? Like, should I, do something that's more fulfilling, more, instead of just chasing money recklessly without really a end goal or wondering if it's fulfilling or if it's going to get me anything else besides financially ahead. So to me, it was
yeah, yeah,
constantly looking for more fulfilling things. The problem with that, especially at a young age, it's like, it almost, in a way, it almost benefits you, it seems like if you come to that realization a little later in life, because at a young age a lot of things seem pointless. So like right out of high school when I was working, like I still don't like my full-time job. It's like I don't enjoy it. It's like it's pointless. It's just so, some people live to work, some people work to live. I lived, I work to live. It's like I work just to kind of pay the bills so I can do the things. I do the things I have to do so I can do the things I want to do. And,
yeah, yeah,
so I do that, but I meet these people who are so like focused, like super focused, ultra focused on finance, right? Oh, I invest in this, I do this, or I do that. Oh, I bought this duplex. I invested in this. Working all the time, and it's like, they're financially doing awesome, right? And I'm just like, I want to believe I've picked the right path that like eventually they're going to reflect and be like, hey, I wish I spent more time with my family. I wish I did pursue things that were more fulfilling and had more purpose. But at the moment when they're they're killing it financially and you're struggling financially, it's really hard sometimes to be like, fuck, I'm like, I'm picking the right life path. And uh, having kids has helped a lot because having such a great relationship with them, their friends, other parents, because I'm constantly coaching and involved, and and I do a lot of things off the pitch and off the court, with like gathering them. Like this Friday, it's like basketball youth night at a high school game. So I'm taking my youth team. We're all going to go there together. They get to hang out. They get to be kids, and kind of also it's a great team bonding thing. And just doing these little things, and I love it. And I know a lot of people are like, oh, I don't have time to coach. I don't have time. I'm like, make time, like, because to me it's like, who cares if you make a couple $100, working on a Saturday, or a couple $1,000 working on a weekend, if you lose that weekend that you can never get again. And the one thing you can't make more is, you can make more money, you can't make more time. And then once that time's gone, it's gone forever. Every weekend you miss out on doing something enjoyable, fulfilling, connecting with your wife, your friends, your kids, your family members, whatever. The It's one weekend that might be gone forever, and you don't know how many you have. And I just had a guest. I've had a few guests that I've been lucky enough to have on the show that I had them on before they passed away. And just recently, what? Oh my God, Ray. Now I'm having a brain fart. I, I'll get his name, but he just recently passed away. I just saw it, and I just had him on recently.
oh,
And James, right? James Ray. Well, where is it? James Arthur Ray. I just want to make sure I got his name correct. But James Arthur Ray, and I just saw online that he passed away. Just had him on my podcast like a couple weeks ago, and it seemed healthy, seemed smart, seemed cognitively there, and just had and it's like when things like that happen, and when you have these what seems like out of the blue, tragic events where either somebody gets in a car accident or somebody whatever. It sometimes we need to like not just look past that, but like use it as a reminder that like, hey, you know what? Like tomorrow's not guaranteed.
Ricky, hold on. How many people did you say that had an interview with you and then suddenly passed away?
I'll tell you after our podcast, so and then you don't try to hang up on me.
Yeah, I was just about. I was thinking,
No, well,
do I want to do this?
Gerard Williams is one, which I had him on twice, which was awesome. He was the guy who wrote Grey Wolf, The Escape of Adolf Hitler. And that was he was awesome because he was one of the first like real credible guys. He was a BBC journalist and was in Argentina doing research on other stuff and found all these books written in Spanish and all these firsthand accounts of people who were saying like, hey, the Nazi Germans like made it here and we saw them and we saw, we know where they lived, the mansion was and all that stuff. And he was the first really credible person that I had on and then eventually had him on again and then eventually ended up being a part of the Hunting Hitler show. But this is exactly, he's a perfect example, and I use it often on why you don't dismiss something, even if it sounds completely against the grain. I remember when I ran into his work, and he's saying, like, and he had such confidence that Hitler did not die in Germany. He made it Argentina. And I'm like, this guy, I'm like, there's no way. I'm like, how can this guy be saying this? Like, I haven't heard it from other people. And I know plenty of World War II buffs or whatever. Like, how is this not a big deal? How have I not heard of this other perspective? And then you do some research and you find out like, oh my God, like there's no evidence that he died in Germany. And there's tons of evidence that he made it Argentina. And, but him and I think Abraham Bolden's still alive. He was the first African American on a presidential detail. He worked for the Secret Service, and he was handpicked by JFK. He was real interesting. He's like 80 something. And then I just had now I feel like I'm picking people who I think are gonna die soon. I'm picking talking about all the really old people. But I just had another guy, which I'm glad because these guys are a little older in life. I think Abraham Bolden was. I mean, he was in his 80s when he was on the show, and just recently I had James Mason. He worked for the Sigmund Freud archives and knew his sister, and he was the one who wrote the book The Assault on Truth, and he got so much backlash and hatred that he ended up writing books about animals and just kind of completely taking another turn with his career because he knew that he was getting so much backlash. But he was one of the ones who exposed that Sigmund Freud understood that sexual abuse and pedophilia and all this stuff was happening in the hierarchy of society. But because he was surrounded by the hierarchy of society, he hid it and came up with this theory that, these kids that were coming to him talking about sexual abuse, that it was all in their head, that it was a illusion, that it was, trauma from something else and whatever. And just basically coming up with ways of denying that it was actually physical sexual abuse from these hierarchies, and he suppressed this. And Jeffrey Mason worked with at the archives, became friends with Anna Freud, who was his daughter, and then showed him these unpublished papers that basically, and he thinks she did it because she wanted to kind of show him that like he knew that like it wasn't in their head, and he published this it was called the seduction theory, and he had this published, but and then it was suppressed from the public because it was just he was going to get hatred, his whole career was going to be jeopardized, all these other things. And I think it was her way of kind of saying like, no, he in there was a good guy and he knew what he was doing was wrong, but which I guess necessarily doesn't necessarily make you a good guy. It might make you even a worse guy because you know what you're doing is wrong
Yeah,
anyway.
yeah.
But Candace Owens has been referencing his book quite often of late. And throughout the years, I've heard it reference The Assault on Truth because it shows that like pedophilia and everything, like this stuff has been in the hierarchy and in the communities of the elite for a long time. This isn't a new thing. And it also seems like maybe the elite were suppressing that information, that it was common. And because they wanted to convince you, where it happens is in country like areas where people marry their cousins and or in trailer parks where stepdads are get drunk every day and wear a wife beater and I know there is a link between step parents and child abuse. I think like the chances of a step parent abusing a child goes way up, which I mean you have to assume it has something to do with like they're not emotionally connected to the child the same way a somebody who is their real father is. But it's yeah, I just hit on a bunch of different things. I'll let you talk now.
Well, no, it might be, it might be the similar wiring that, if a bear comes across a she bear with cubs, he'll try to kill the cubs. Same with lions and I think tigers and other animals, because you want the you want the mate, but you don't want her wasting resources on these cubs that are not your that don't carry your genes, I guess. So maybe there's some kind of a suppressed hostility there to begin with, and then you know and then the child already is not sure about you because you're not the father, so there's probably a little bit of that wiring there too. So the child is frightened, the child is afraid, and then maybe they misbehave, and in the end, but there are other cases also where people bond and everything is good. So I think it's probably a question of making a conscious decision. You adopt somebody, whether formally or not formally, and you treat them like your own. And I mean, if we can do that with dogs and cats, then why shouldn't we be able to do it with other humans? I think it should work. But anyway, uh, I I have a neighbor in Monaco who raised 7 children, and 3 of them are his own, and 4 of them they adopted. He and his wife adopted them because they're kind of like nice people. They're devout Catholics, and they felt that it was their duty to try to you know rescue these kids from homes and adopt them and raise them. And as far as he's concerned, they've given the same love and the same upbringing to these 4 adopted kids as they did to their 3 natural born children. And now they're all grown up, and all 3 of their own children are perfectly well adjusted, successful people who are living normal, productive lives. All 4 of their adopted children are a complete and total mess. One of them's in and out of prison, drugs, alcohol, depressions, all kinds of shit. So, it's not obvious. It's a problem. And then if you have abuse in the mix, then it's a heartbreaking mess. So, this may not seem like a relevant topic to talk about, but the fact is that for a few generations now, the ruling establishments in the Western countries have been doing everything they possibly could to undermine the family structure. So there's more and more and more of these, broken families, broken children, predatory behavior from adults, and it creates a broken society altogether because what typically happens is that the children stay with their mothers as a rule. So a typical family will be a single mother with children, or a single mother with her mother, like mother, grandmother, and the children. this is what I encountered in Venezuela. When I lived in Venezuela, I noticed that like the typical family in Venezuela was grandmother, mother, and the kids. And men were nowhere in sight. And it was talked about how, men get these women pregnant and then they bolt. And the reason why they bolt is that they can't afford, they just can't afford to raise a family. So they escape because it's easier to maintain yourself if you're just one person than if you have to maintain a wife and children. And so, the result is that you have a lot of broken men out on the streets who are then susceptible to doing, to joining criminal gangs, uh, to rob, kill, kidnap, um, go work as mercenaries, and today, unfortunately, I noticed that more and more frequently in the United States, a typical family is a single mother with children or mother, grandmother, and the children. There's the absence of the father. And uh, when a few years ago, I read a book called The Boy Crisis. I don't know if you're aware of that book. Dr. Farrell, I forget his first name now, Robert, I think, Dr. Robert Farrell. And he spent 30 or 40 years researching family issues, couples, children, divorces, adoptions, all of these things. And he wrote this book as was like he condensed all the research that he's come across, and it leads very compellingly to the conclusion that the number one factor in raising boys, particularly children in general, but boys in particular, is the presence of the father. And if the father is absent, that is, if he abandons the family and the children, the probability that the male children will end up with problems like, dropping out of school, having no career, no jobs, developing dependencies, addiction to video games, pornography, drugs, alcohol, that they will, you know, steep into violence, that they will end up in prison, or that they will end up with depressions and ultimately commit suicide. It goes off the charts. It increases by 500 to 1,000%. And so, what you're talking about is actually really, really important, not just because it's worth spending the time with your children and your loved ones, but because that's what actually builds them up. And that's what, that's probably the best investment of time and energy that you're even capable of making, because as you said, money comes and goes, you can make it again, but it's not just the time spent with your children, it's what that time does in terms of making them balanced, self-confident, self-reassured, constructive, productive, and confident people in life, which then serves them forever and then makes them better parents in turn in the future, and so forth and so on. So, it's not a small thing. It's not a small trade-off between making money and uh, just indulging time with kids. It's far, far more important than that.
No, absolutely. I mean, so many times you hear about these mass shooters, and I'm like, how did your child plan to shoot up a school for 6 months and you didn't pick up on the fact that maybe they're a little more depressed than usual, or maybe that depression has gone far enough where you really need to do something about it? I just don't. It's like you're not spending time with your kid, and you're not talking. And I always say, I'm like, if you're not influencing your kid, if you're not answering their questions, something is. And if you're not molding their worldview, somebody else, something else is. So it's like they're sponges and everything is new and everything is, you know, they need explanations for stuff and they have questions. And if you're not there, and if they watch a YouTube channel that has a explanation about something, then that becomes their explanation. That's what they adopt to that worldview. They adopt that explanation because they don't have anybody else to kind of, critique it or give a opposite perspective on things. So, without a doubt, there's a quote that I actually heard on Patrick Bet David, and I forget which guest said it, but he brought it up recently with that guy Chase Hughes about how like genetics, and they're talking about like people who snap, psychopaths or whatever, and it was something like I was actually looking for, I couldn't find the freaking quote, but it was something along the lines of like genetics loads the gun, trauma like points it, and then like or psychology points it, and then experience pulls the trigger. But it was something along those lines. But it's true. Like, there's a lot of people that are like right at the edge, but maybe they have a supportive, community. Maybe they have friends or family that can help out or whatever. And then you get somebody who's like struggling and they have nobody. They have whatever. And then it just takes one really bad life experience, maybe losing their job and they can't, they're already struggling to pay their bills. Maybe their wife leaving them, maybe their kids not wanting to talk, whatever it may be, and then they snap, right? And so it's like, it is the nature versus nurture thing. I think it's an endless debate, but I think everybody's kind of just decide that it's a little bit of both. It's neither only one or the other. But with COVID, that's kind of the long term. I think when they talked about long COVID, I'm like, that's what long COVID is. Long COVID is all the mental health issues we have today that we don't realize is due to the isolation, the fear mongering, the scaring people, the giving them so much conflicting information that they don't know what to believe and they're confused. Just all these things that I think has led to some of the issues we see today with just the antidepressants going up, the even just some of the health issues. I think some of the health issues absolutely are due to the mRNA vaccine and forcing people to get it. Healthy young kids to go back to college, how to get it and all that stuff. I think that's absurd, and I think that definitely is contributing. But I also think the stress that you put on the kids and the infighting with the family members fighting about like I'm not going to wear a mask or no I am going to wear a mask, or like every election was especially the not the last one but the one before that during the COVID era, like just how much dislike there was between people who had different political views or worldviews, and it was like you had all this tension and everybody would constantly say, oh, I could feel that we're in like this spiritual battle. And I think some of that feeling that they had was because there's so much tension in the world that we all felt it. And to think that people can just go back to everyday life and not have any lasting effects is like telling a Iraqi veteran or Vietnam veteran that, hey, go back to everyday life and you're not going to have any lasting effects of this trauma from being in war. It's like, of course there's going to be some lasting effects, and not everybody's trauma is the same. Like there is going to be examples of people who handled it well and moved on. But somebody just told me recently this example, and it's a good one. If I'm in a car accident with four different people, I might never think about that car accident again. But somebody in that car might never drive again because of the trauma they have from that car accident, that exact same car accident. So it's like the same experience can have a completely different outcome on different people. And I think there's people who handled COVID very well, and I think there's people who are probably never going to be the same because of it.
We're all definitely different. But when you mentioned influencing your children because they're exposed to this and that, I think my experience is that it's simpler than that because they will be exposed to nonsense anyway. You don't have control over that, and you can't generally tell them how to think because as time goes by they get more and more opinionated, and there's not much you can do. But Here's what happened in my case, which was really, really an important teachable moment in my case. So I had this neighbor who had a dog, and he walked the dog around the neighborhood, and I walked the dog around the neighborhood. So we sometimes crossed and said hello. And then once it was my ex-wife who kind of, there was some kind of an incident between him and my ex-wife over dogs, because his dogs attacked our dog or something like that. I don't remember what it was. But then, around 2018, I had my own divorce. And for whatever reason, I felt like I needed to talk to this man. And when I talked to him, I realized that he was very, very keenly aware of the tensions between me and my ex-wife, and the way he diagnosed it was just remarkably perceptive and correct. I was like, wow. And then he explained to me that he actually grew up in a home with an abusive father. He said that his father was very violent and abusive, and then he left the family. He left him, he abandoned them, and so he grew up without a father. And he said, I can't tell you how painful this is. He said, but uh, pretty much my whole life I spent on psychiatric medications. I spent many years in the psychiatric institutions, and to this day he said, I'm not okay. I have to take antidepressants and so forth. But at the same time, there was a lot of depth to him. And so the way he was talking and the way he was explaining all the experience, it was very striking to me, because obviously, having lived through all this, he had a chance to think through a lot of it, make a lot of observations, and then that's why he was so perceptive in spotting the tensions between me and my wife, and seeing that, like, we had the dog, we had the children, and what it all meant. And so at the moment, at that time, I was kind of generally panicked, because I thought that we're going to ruin our kids. They were 6 and 8 at the time, and we were going through a divorce, and she was gonna be as hostile through the whole process as she could. And I was really, really very panicked about what's going to happen to our kids through the whole process. And I said to him, this is an awkward question to ask, but I asked him, like, is there anything I can do to make sure that my kids don't turn out like you? And he said, yes, absolutely, you can. And I said, what do I have to do? And he said, just be there and make sure that they know that you love them. That's the only thing you have to do, and that's all you have to do. And in a strange way, I understood him in the way that I knew at that moment that he exactly was right. So, through their upbringing, it's been now 6 years since I had my divorce. That's pretty much what I've done. And when my kids watch stupid stuff on YouTube and everything, if they ask me, I tell them what I think. If they don't ask me, I don't tell them anything. They know I'm there. They'll form opinions about this and that. Most of them will turn out to be wrong, but that's how life is. If you think about stuff you might have thought when you were really young, things you might have liked when you were really young, and all that, you realize that you got so much stuff wrong. I mean, maybe you didn't, but I did for sure. That, I think they're growing. The same way as they were born, they didn't know how to speak, they didn't know how to use their arms, they didn't know how to walk. Now they're learning how to think, and they have to probably process a lot of ideas and like when you learn how to walk, you have to first crawl, then you fall over a million times and so forth. So that process probably goes on with the intellectual development and emotional development, and your social graces and everything. They will get there, and my job is to make sure that they know that they are unconditionally loved and supported, and then they're going to be okay. And so far, so good. I have to say, in spite of the divorce, my kids are completely well adjusted. They're almost invariably happy and cheerful. Uh, they're conscientious in the sense that I never have to tell them, you have to study, you have to do your homework, you have to do this, you have to do that. They just kind of take care of their stuff themselves. And so I think that if there's any parents out there listening, that is the most important lesson I learned about parenting. And it came from the guy from a broken home with a broken mind and a broken soul who told me exactly the one thing he was deprived of in life and that he craved. And so maybe that's all. That's all we need to do. Be there. Just be there. Everything else is in God's hand. And the same way that these kids they come into the world, they also have everything they need to grow into quality adults. We just need to nourish them along the way.
Yeah, I'm also a big believer of that. It's like we're gonna make mistakes along the way, as parents, and we did it as kids, and now we do it as parents, and we're all kind of just figuring out the right path. But if you love your children and your heart's in the right place, and you reflect on your decision making, and you are honest with them, everything will fall into place, and everything will be okay. And I'm the same way with my kids. I always say, like, kids don't do what you say, they do what you do. So like I always try to, you know, um, try try to be as honest as possible, so then they can learn to be honest. I try to be as disciplined as possible. I try to eat right. And I know, as polite as possible. My kids are very polite in school. Like the teachers love them and whatnot, and they always have really amazing feedback. And I'm like, yeah, because I didn't tell them to say please and thank you. I didn't tell them to hold the door for people. They've seen me do it. They do it
Yeah.
when we go out.
Exactly. Yeah, that beautiful. You just confirmed exactly what I was trying to say on your concrete case. Yeah, that's exactly it. They figure it all out. They just figure it all out. All you have to do is be there and, be yourself and give them that example. If you, on the other hand, if you were vulgar and impolite and unreliable and you did all those things, and at the same time you told your children, well, you have to be polite because otherwise you're a bad boy, and you have to do this, then they're too smart. They're too smart not to see that, and in the end, they you lose credibility with them, and then they go and they gravitate elsewhere to where things make better sense.
Yeah, the losing credit. I see it all the time with parents who are like, I yell at my kid all, don't do this. I'm like, but you're not the perfect example of all those things you want your kids to do. It's like,
Yeah, yeah.
and like you said, you don't think about it. Like you just see, oh, do what I say, not what I do. But I'm like, that is not the right way of parenting. It's not.
No, no, no. I think that the kids are very, very sharp. They're very perceptive. And one decision I made very early on with my kids is that I would never lie to them. And there's a million times where it would be so much easier to lie to them, because like, I don't know, they want something and you don't want them to have it, so it's easy enough to say, like, oh no, the shop's closed, oh no, no, they don't have that anymore. But they always work it out in the end, and then they realize that you lie to them. And I don't know, I have this in generation, like my parents will, oh, we want ice cream, no, no, the shop's closed, and then the kids work out that the shop's not closed, and then they're like, but you lied to me. Shit, now what? You can't unlie a lie. You just lost your credibility. And they will always suspect that you're lying to them, especially when it's most important for you to be believed. And so, what have you done now? You took a shortcut, and in the end, it cost you your credibility. So, yeah, I think it's really important not to do that to kids. It's not, Dostoevsky has a whole passage in The Idiot about don't deceive the children. I think it's in the Idiot. Maybe not, but it's actually a very beautiful passage where he like says, "Do not deceive the children because they're pure. Don't ruin them."
I've been there myself where like I'm a big believer of like sticking to my word. So if I say, hey, we can go here, we can go there, or we can do something, like I'm gonna do my best to make sure I can keep that word. And there's times where like, my wife will be like, okay, it's too late. We can't go now. I'm like, yeah, but I told him we'd go. And she's like, who cares? We'll go tomorrow. I'm like, yeah, but I gave him my word that we would go. And I told him if it was too late, I would still take him. Don't worry about it. And it's like, and I put myself in that position where I'm like, your word is important, like,
Yeah,
and if I let you down, I want you to know I did my best to not let you down. I didn't just,
yeah,
I
yeah,
didn't, like you
yeah,
said,
yeah, yeah,
I didn't take the shortcut to lie, to try to get out of something. And, because it would be more convenient to do so. And to me, those little things are so important. Those little, and it's funny because my wife, she went through, her parents went through a divorce when she was young. And sometimes I talked to her about it and how it affected her and whatnot. And but her dad always one thing I always gave him a lot of credit for was he never talked poorly about his mother. I mean her mother. And he never, like my wife grew up and didn't even know why the parents divorced because he never like he could have bashed her, he could have said something, never did. And so often you see the parents turn the kids on one another and using them as pawns and whatnot. And the other thing too is like we grew up in an era where, I remember growing up like there wasn't a whole lot of divorces and it was kind of, you looked at the families that like divorced, like, there's something wrong with them, or like, I wonder what happened to them, like kind of like they're outsiders, like they were the exception to the rule. Most parents had, or most family households had two parents that were together and got married and whatever. Um, but and I'm like, I there's there's pros and cons of divorce being kind of socially unacceptable because I think like the pros are maybe people don't jump to that solution as quickly because it's like, well, we don't want to be the divorce family. Let's see if we can figure this out. But there's also some pros of it being socially acceptable because I think there's a lot of people who, like we talked about, the one thing you can't make more is time. You can't get to the end of your road and say, you know what, I didn't like the paths I chose. Let me hit the reset button and start over. It's like there's no doing that. So, I think it being socially acceptable is good because people are like, you know what, I'm not happy. I don't care what people think. It's pretty acceptable. I know people are divorced. I'm gonna be happy. And I tell parents, I tell friends of mine, I'm like, listen, you're better off being a good parent separated than being two miserable parents together. You think being together, you can deceive the child that there's friction in the house and you guys don't like each other. But if you're together, that's the right thing for the child. But the truth is, you're better off having two happy parents that are separated than two miserable parents that are together. And the kids can see through your bullshit. I remember years ago, and I think it was her name was Professor Darcia. She professor of psychology at Notre Dame, and she said that kids when they're little that the younger you are, the better you are picking up on social cues because you don't have language to really explain what you want or whatnot. So you do a lot of your understanding of the world through social cues, the way you look, the way so sometimes parents think like, oh, I have a toddler in the house. They can't tell that there's friction between us. It's like, no, no, they can. They can pick up on your face, the way you walk, the way you maybe slam the door, maybe, and that every time you have these things going on, that it means that mom and dad aren't getting along, So, if you're passive aggressive, like you think, oh, they're not picking up on it, like they are, your husband's picking up on
yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah,
And so
yeah,
is the child, So it's like you can't hide it from them. And so it's like I tell people life's too short. Like if you're in an unhappy situation, like be happy apart and as long as you don't use your kids as a pawn to turn them on each other, like just go your own separate ways, come together. And I actually know quite a few people that and it sounds like your situation is pretty similar, but I know quite a few people who are not together and they co-parent together and they're phenomenal parents, but they're just not together. It just they weren't compatible.
yeah,
And
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think that's there's more and more of that, and it's become it's become almost acceptable because when in my kids' school, it's more than half the parents that are divorced.
Now,
So I
do you think some of it is, I kind of hinted on it, but like, do you think some of it is maybe resolvable issues, but because it's acceptable, and there's all, because the other thing you have to factor in too, like we live in a different world where there's a lot more temptation in the world too, right? I always joke around with my dad. I'm like, you had my mom and a goat to pick from, so you picked mom, and so like you didn't have a whole lot of options, and I joke around with him when she's driving him crazy. I'm like, it's not your fault, Dad. I'm like, you had a mom and a goat to pick from. Mom will feed you forever. The goat will feed you for a day. So it's but but the thing now with all this temptation, right? Like you have, people can go on Tinder, people can go. I mean, remember when Ashley Madison was a thing? I don't know if you remember that app. It was for
yeah, I remember that.
cheat on their spouse would go on there. So it's like you have all this stuff that you have people hitting, looking for high school sweethearts on Facebook. Oh, let me find that classmate, see how she's looking. Oh, she's looking good. Let me hit her up on Instagram or Facebook. So it's like you have all this temptation, and I wonder if that's also a huge contributor to the high divorce rates.
It may be, but I think that there are deliberate attempts being made to undermine the family structure, and in it started with the feminist movement, pretty much. I think in the late '60s, early '70s. It was deliberate and it was premeditated. And it's going on until today. And I live in Monaco. Monaco is a principality. It's not a democracy, and it's very Catholic. But nevertheless, in the public places, every so often they'll have these advertisements in public places that pretty much encourage women to leave their husbands. Yeah, and I mean it's so in your face. It's so in your face. It's almost like, come on, get the hell out of there. And they'll have these photographs with, and then they'll kind of airbrush into it like a woman breaking through a glass dome, like the glass breaks and she walks out, with dignity, or in some pictures she's jogging out. In some pictures she's holding her child by the hand and she's walking out. And it's all something like, um, your freedom is important and blah, 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 blah. I mean, it's quite unbelievable, but it's like screaming at the women, just get out. And so I think that if a woman finds herself in some kind of a crisis with her husband, these kind of things are uh, pushing her over to say, yeah, the hell with it. And whereas once upon a time, it was a much, much harder decision. And people, I think, felt like they had to work on it, like they had to overcome a crisis. And I remember that in my family, my parents, they're in their 80s and they are still together and they're good together. But there was a period of time where when I remember that my brother and I, and we must have been very young, maybe, a little bit younger or a little bit older than 10, like around that age. I remember that we were talking about who are you going to go with, because we were perceiving that there was a chance that they were going to split up. And we were like, oh, I'll go with dad. I'll go with that. We wanted to go with dad. But uh, obviously, we as kids realized that, you know, they they might split up. And then, there was a crisis period. They came on the other side of it, and then everything was all right for forever after that. So I don't know what the problem is. They obviously didn't share any of it with us, but they overcame it. And then, 50 years later, 40 years later, they're still together. And, by now, I don't expect that anybody will run off with somebody else in their 80s. So, they fulfill their oath of until death do us part. And so I think that today, if divorce wasn't quite as easy to obtain, I think that more couples would weather their crisis and stay together. But,
Well,
who
it's
knows?
that saying, satisfaction is the death of desire. And I think desire is a very strong feeling. And I think what happens is that you're with somebody for so long, most of that desire is gone, or at least it's mild. And you meet somebody new, or you run into somebody new, and that desire is very strong. It's like, oh my God, she's beautiful, or she's charming, or she's this, or she's that. And you don't realize that, like, hey, that was the same feeling you had for the person you were with, years ago. And that in time, things will, plateau and you'll be in the exact same situation. And I think that happens quite a bit.
No, of course, but that's normal because, the woman you marry, she's not going to be forever the most beautiful, the sexiest, the most interesting person you could possibly be around. Time's going to go by, and there's going to be more attractive women that you're going to meet, and there's going to be funnier women and sexier women, and so on and so. But that's not complicated. You know that in advance. So, when you make your oath, you make peace with the fact that this is it, right? And then, you have to keep that peace. That's a simple thing. But I didn't have the choice, in some cases, obviously, it's maybe the woman who decides she's had enough and she wants out for whatever reason. And then, it doesn't help you that you're not inclined to go fool around and that you're faithful and all this stuff. It's I think that the attack on the family has come from every angle conceivable. From making women go to work, making it harder and harder for families to make ends meet. So where one income could easily maintain a family, now you need two incomes to, and so you're exposed to stress at work, and then your wife is exposed to stress at work as well. And then you're both exposed to the stress that, juggling work and children is extremely difficult. And then not only that, but, it used to be completely normal that families lived in the same household for generations. So you had parents and grandparents, and everybody was there. And, today, people are being shamed for that. But as a parent, I can tell you that there's nothing quite so relieving and reassuring as having your parents around when you have kids. And yeah, okay, you can hire a babysitter, but that's nothing. That doesn't even compare to the care you get from your own parent, i.e., the child's grandparent, and the fact that you can say, "Oh, I'll spend the night," or I'll come back in 3 days. You can do whatever you want. Everything is okay. With the babysitter, it has to be okay. Well, we'll be back in 3 hours, and then you're stressing if you're not back in 3 hours. So anyway, and then in more numerous households, somebody always cooks. There's somebody always to do the laundry, somebody to do the ironing, somebody to do the cleaning, somebody to do the groceries. When you're just a man and wife, you got to take care of absolutely everything: the errands, the paperwork, the groceries, the cooking, the cleaning, the taking care of the children. For a nuclear family, it's absolutely overwhelming. And that in itself introduces huge amount of stress into the life. Having parents around is a huge relief. And then you pay for only one household, and then you don't have to have a mortgage at all. You live for free. So, this whole business of shaming people for staying home and living with their parents, I don't get it. I think it's one of those cultural poisons that somehow got introduced that nobody questions. But, in Italy, it's a completely normal thing that children live with their parents, even when they have their own children. And you have multi-generational family businesses and farms and whatever you have, and that's how it's been for centuries, for generations. Where's the problem? So, breaking all this up into smaller and smaller and smaller units puts more and more and more burden on individuals or couples, and that makes them crack when things get difficult.
Yeah, it's funny because I was watching, I believe, a documentary, and they were talking about how the Muslims in the Middle East and like the Saudis, Qatar, they look at like Americans and they laugh at them, and they're like, You guys care more about your pets than you do your parents. Like you'll throw your parents into an old home the second they become, a little bit difficult or they require a little bit of help, but you'll spend thousands on surgery for a dog, and it is funny because it's sad at the same time. I have friends of mine that are Lebanese and friends of mine that are Christians and really religious people that are friends of mine, and they all live together for a very long time into adulthood until like eventually maybe they have kids and they want their own house with their wife, but then they move they build a house nearby or move.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
This idea of like your parents being in a different state or different country, it's like it's absurd to them. It's like, well, what if we need a babysitter? What if something if what if we're sick? What if we're and
Exactly.
it's so true. Like my one of my good friends, he's Lebanese. They all live together forever, and I'm like, think about the stress of life that removes. Because if you lose your job, you live in a house that everybody contributes to. It's not all on you. So you lose your job, or things get more expensive. It's okay because I'm helping pay the bills. My brother's helping pay the bills. My mom, my dad, everybody's helping out. Everybody's contributing, and I don't have all this stress on myself. So the American dream, which I remember a song I wrote years ago. I called it "The Sabotage the American Dream." It's really a nightmare. It's like, hey, the dream is you live on your own. Right? You live in this white picket fence. You have no neighbors. You don't talk to any of your neighbors. It's like, oh, that's great if everything's going well. If shit hits the fan, you're on your own, and then that stress.
Yeah, you have zero social support network.
Exactly.
And that's like driving a race car and having no seatbelt and having no airbags and nothing. So, like it's great for as long as you're in control. If you lose control for a second, you're minced meat. And this is exactly right what you said. If you live in with the extended family and you lose your job, what happens? Nothing happens. Nothing at all. You keep a roof over your head. Your kids keep their roofs over your head. The only thing that happens is that maybe the finances get a little bit tighter for the family for a period of time, and you adjust. And in times when this was the normal family arrangement, people planned their households around this. They didn't make a tiny little house where everybody had to be on top of each other. They built a house to be able to accommodate larger families, and even in a way that you could kind of separate the apartments where you shared maybe the laundry room and the kitchen or the living room, but everybody had their own living quarters where they could be completely in peace and ice. So all of these things can be done. And then, but the the uh, the state doesn't want us to have a social support network. They want us to be completely dependent on the state.
Well,
And it's the same as if they don't want us to collect rainwater. They don't want us to be off grid. They don't want us to be autonomous and resilient. They want to be able to coerce us into whatever they need to coerce us into because we depend for everything on the state. And so, this I think has been a massive marketing campaign to persuade young people that, the bold butch thing to do is to go off on your own, get into debt up to your eyeballs for 30 years, buy the biggest house that you possibly can with what you're earning, and to be there by yourself. And that all piles stress and anxiety. And if you lose your job, you lose your home. And now you're on the street, right? Or you have to go back to your parents into their basement, or
Or
I
do you
don't know
think,
what, but it makes living very, very precarious.
I was going to say the other option, which I think is what the state loves the most, is how about you just put everything on a credit card? Just
Yeah,
just
yeah, 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 exactly.
put it on a credit card. I mean, they were talking about since COVID, like just credit card uh, debt has gone up just drastically. It's like, okay, you can't afford this. Hey, just put it on a credit card. By the way, like the interest is going to be ridiculous. You'll be paying it off for the rest of your life, and we'll be making money off your misfortune. And that's the world we live in. And I think you're right. I think it's not accidental that they're breaking up the family, they're breaking up, the more you're dependent on them, the better. Douglas Ruskoff, who wrote President Shock and a bunch of other stuff, he was on a few times back in the day on the podcast. I remember he was the first one who told me about like the first suburb in the US and how it was like it was in New York. I think but maybe even somewhere on Long Island, but it was like designed for neighbors not to talk to one another and for the purpose of getting, like, if I need a lawnmower, instead of borrowing my neighbor's lawnmower, I go buy a lawnmower. If I need tomatoes, instead of knowing my neighbor who grows more than he can eat, I have to go buy it. And it's like
Yeah,
it helps
yeah,
with this getting you just stuck in the system. And that's why the universal basic income debate is so it's it's a complex, complicated conversation because in a way it's like eventually it seems like it's going to be the only way that we're going to survive because it's like they're just making everything so difficult, so difficult, so difficult that it's almost going to be easier for most people to be like, okay, just give me enough to pay for the necessities because I can barely do it on my own. And but
yeah,
then you're going to be
yeah.
on the government tit and then we'll be breastfed forever, which actually doesn't sound bad, but not if it's a government's tit.
Yeah, 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 exactly. Oh, I wanted to share another observation about living together in with extended family. When I was married, and my wife herself came from a dysfunctional family, which is why, she was more anxious than the average person, and so she was uh, relatively confrontational as a person. So she and I would have arguments very often. But I noticed that if we were spending time with my brother's family or with my parents or with her parents, like if we were together with other people, that our relationship was much, much better. And it was simply because we all had to moderate ourselves, because you're not going to make a scene in front of everybody else. So if it's just the man and the wife, uh, there's no guardrails. You just go off, right? And sometimes it gets very, very heated. Whereas if your parents are there in the same house and or your brother and aunts and uncles and whoever, then you kind of take care not to go overboard. And then, every conflict is relatively easy to manage, unless it's something totally off, because sometimes you can have really big fights over nothing. And exactly because there's no moderation. You don't know, you're with the person that you perceive to be the source of all your problems and anxiety, right? So you let them have it. Whereas if you're in an extended family situation where other people are present, then you moderate yourself just not to make that scene. So that's another way in which extended families make like life better for everybody else. And it's very real. It's very real because you know, it's it's easy to get over things like, oh, you left the toilet seat up, you know. That's one of those typical things. What's the big deal? It's not a big deal, but sometimes, couples can really have a huge fight over things as little as this, or you left your shoes in the wrong place. So yeah, I wanted to mention that.
Well, it's years of well, you know what it is? It's like it's little things and then years of it. I think after a while your fuse gets shorter and shorter. And so I think that is, but you're right. Like so often I try to tell myself, I'm like, be as polite to people that I'm comfortable not being polite to as I am to people I'm not comfortable around. You know what I mean? Like it just
Yeah.
it's too easy sometimes to like say something without reflecting on what you're about to say when it's somebody you've been around for forever and ever, you know. So it's hard, you know. The dynamic of a relationship is difficult, you know. Nothing good in life comes, you know, without some work. And it's you know, I when you have kids, it's another curveball to the relationship because a lot of times initially it feels like it added to the relationship. You're going through this journey together. It's awesome. It's like we're both going through this for the first time together. We're becoming parents together. We became parents because we loved each other, and that's why we decided to take this next step. But and then you get this dilemma where it's like now maybe the parents are giving all their love to the kids and they get neglected. The relationship gets neglected. And I always say relationships are like a plant. Like you need to water it or eventually it dies. And most people think like, you know, relationships are like a fake plant that you can just put on the counter. It looks good all the time and it's never going to die. But the truth is, it's a real plant that needs time and nurturing
Yeah.
and water
Yeah.
from time to
Yeah.
time. So a lot of times, and I don't think it's anybody's fault, but it's just like becoming a parent is such a incredible journey that you give so much attention to your kids and so much of your love to the kids that your kids get the best of you and a lot of times relationship gets the worst of you, right? You know, you guys are hanging out when
Yeah.
you're short and it's like, you know, and then sometimes people resent that. You know, I've heard of people who are in relationships and then they they fight with their wife because they feel like the wife loves the kids so much that it doesn't give them any love. That you're almost there's some jealousy there, you know. But
Yeah.
yeah, the relationships it's funny because when you're in them, you just feel like they're easily understood. But then when you really start breaking it down, you realize all the complexity of it. You know, what one of my favorite quotes is women marry men or when men marry women hoping they never change, and women marry men hoping they can change them. And there's a lot of truth to that. Like I can I see how sometimes like I have friends of mine who you know we play sports together and like oh the wife you know wants me to do that and I'm like, but when you guys start dating, this was you. You did these things with your friends and you played sports and you went to the gym and you did what like you're not giving her something new that now she has to accept. You're just asking her to accept the thing that she's accepted when she married you. And then vice versa, right? Like it seems like the woman wants to change them slightly after, you know, like if a male's not perfect, a woman might be like, he's not exactly what I want, but I can make him what I want. You know, like
Right, right.
so it's like you know, you do see some of that dilemma, and that's why I'm a big believer of like, listen, I will never give my wife a hard time for doing things that she's always done, you know, like and she shouldn't do that to me. Like I've always been a gym rat, and I always need to play sports once or twice a week to kind of for my therapy. This is who you married. This is who I am. This is who I'll always be. This is the how I'm at my best and I'm my happiest. Don't give me crap for that, you know? And I think people do need some of that too. Like work on yourself, do some things just for you because if you're happy, you know, happiness starts internally, it starts with you first. Then you can also be a better spouse if you do some of the things that you enjoy that make you happy.
Yeah, yeah. Amen. Amen.
Yeah, yeah, without a doubt. But, you know, to go to the speaking of, you're in France. I don't know if I've ever asked you about this. Have you ever looked into the prime minister's or not the prime minister, the president, Macron's wife being a man? Have you went down that rabbit hole?
Well, a little bit,
The whole the
because my general impression is that the she is a man, or was at least. But I'm generally not terribly interested in this. Whether she is or isn't, it's not a, it's, I don't care so much. I think that the work that Candace Owens has done is more, way, way, way more than anything I'm interested in doing.
But does
The
it?
only thing is that I think that ultimately this is going to reflect on the confidence that people have in their democracy, because they will, once that's out, they will realize that the whole tapestry is fake. That everything's a lie. That there's no line that these people won't cross. It couldn't be a deception by Emmanuel Macron and his wife. It had to be a very broad conspiracy to keep this truth from the French people, to feed them the lie, and to get that man elected with the help of that big lie. And then what else are they lying about in that case? Is there any line that they won't cross? Clearly, there's no line that they won't cross. And so at that point, you lose confidence in your whole system of governance. And then, the French already are, generally uppity people. They don't easily tolerate nonsense. And so who knows, when in some future, which might not be so far away, even they might wheel out the guillotines once more.
Yeah, I'm like you. I'm not into celebrity news or gossip or whatever. The only reason I find this story worth discussing or people realizing is because I think it's just another piece of evidence that the elite, like you said, are fake, and that what you see is not what you get. And I think that was some of the appeal with Trump. Like it seemed like, okay, like love him or hate him, like he can't help but be himself, even when probably his advisors are telling him don't say that or don't whatever. And I think, it also I think exposes and highlights the the weird occultist, satanic, sexual craziness that happens behind the scenes. I think there's a lot of when you look at the higher ups of like what's his name, Vanguard, who is the Canadian fashion designer. You look at Weinstein with Hollywood. You look at Epstein. You look at just all Jimmy Savile in the UK. You look at Dennis Hastert, the Speaker of the House. You look at like all Franklin scandal. Even in Portugal, I think I talked about it recently on a show. There was this orphanage, Casa Pia, which was a sponsor, I think funded by the government or whatever, and it was an orphanage, and they were using this orphanage to traffic children, and it was like this huge scandal that was like suppressed. And then the Belgium story, which I talked about recently with Dr. Jessica Rose when she was on. And like all these weird things. So it's like, and I think the reason, again, like there's multiple reasons why this is important. Because I think if you realize that these are sick people who are running things, then it's easier for you to understand that, like, yeah, they can kill those people knowingly. They can go to a war and lie about it or why they're there. They can, force you to take a vaccine that they know are going to harm people. Like, I think once you realize they're sick and they're psychopaths running the world, then it's easier for you to accept some of the other things. And you know, uh, I'm glad somebody like Candace Owens has the
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. I
like
agree with that.
there was it was funny because one of the first times she was on the Rogan podcast years ago, they got in a debate about climate change. She's like, I don't believe it. She's like, it doesn't make sense to me. I don't get, and it's like, she was like, real. And at the time, this was like before it was more socially acceptable to even challenge it. Like, and Rogan was like, he was the typical normie who's like, are you sure there's all these scientists that are, and she's like, no, I don't believe it. I think it's bullshit, and I'm like, I'm like, the world needs people like that. The world needs
Yeah,
people
yeah,
who are like, if something doesn't make sense, I'm not going to pretend it makes sense just because some expert, quote unquote, said it. And it's same thing with the Macron thing. It seems absurd and ridiculous, like on the surface, but she did a little digging and she's like, no, something doesn't make sense here. And I know people are going to say I'm crazy or whatever, but she has the courage to come out and say stuff. And the world needs more of that. I think you shared it on your Twitter. If a book if you ban a if a book is worth banning, it's worth reading. Uh,
yeah.
and but that's what we need. We need more of those people who go against the grain and ask questions. Because if not, then we all just accept the narrative, and then but the problem is the narrative can be controlled, right?
Yeah, but I find all this quite wonderful, because I've been for many, many years, I've been one of these kooky conspiracy theories that people thought like, oh God, here he goes again with another. And yeah, I've been the wars, the Islamophobia, the Russophobia, all of these things, the pandemics, which have been, they've been doing one pandemic once a year or once every 2 years since pretty much since 2003. 9/11, the anthrax attacks, uh, all of this stuff, nothing rang true to me ever. In fact, it rang false completely. And then, even if you're not sure about how false it is, you see how they respond to these events, and I mean, you don't have to be a genius to realize that they're covering up and obfuscating. And so when the pandemic started, I was on day zero, I was completely convinced that it was a hoax. But the good thing about the pandemics is I think it was a very, very powerful inflection point. I think that a lot of people who were normies before the pandemic are not normies anymore because it was too blatant, too in your face, too obvious, and too stupid and ridiculous for many people not to notice that there's something very, very terribly wrong with the whole thing. And I think it pushed a lot of people into speaking out, even though there was gonna be hell to pay. It was just too much, people wouldn't uh, comply anymore. And so I think that whereas before the pandemic, maybe I don't know, the conspiracy theories were, maybe 1% of the people. I think today there's a very, very solid percentage of people who no longer believe the media or the government. And I don't know what the number is, whether it's 15% or if it's 50% or 70% or whatever it is, but it's no longer, like 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000. And it's now much more acceptable to question these orthodoxies that we're being served up. Oh, climate change is real and we have to stop it or else we're all going to be dead. No, really, I don't believe it. So now it's okay. We never landed on the moon. Maybe, before it was like, are you crazy? That's just so, that's so out there. You can't even express that doubt in polite society. Vaccines are safe and effective. Yeah, unless they're not. So all of these sacred cows that we used to have that were untouchable and you really couldn't express any doubt about it in polite society, now it's okay. Now you can discuss them. And I think that's wonderful because more and more people are discussing it. And I think that the more they discuss it, the more the general opinion in the population converges on the truth. And so, and it helps to have social media and it helps to have platforms that have, some free speech still allowed. Uh, and I think that in the same way as the truth can make us free, the lies can enslave us. So I think we're in a much, much better position to discover truth, and I think that we are too.
Well, like you mentioned before about parenting, like you don't want to lose credibility. Well, I think the government has finally lost all its credibility.
Yeah,
People,
yeah.
it,
Yeah.
it's no different than with your kids. I think the adults have been lied to, and it was so obviously a lie, and it was so obviously deceiving that they're like, now you've lost credibility. So a lot of things I never questioned before, now I'm open to questioning, and I'm curious if you're lying about this or about that. That's like all the recent events that have happened. The current event stuff, like the Tesla Cybertruck bombing, the healthcare assassination in New York, the New Orleans a truck driver who drove the truck down Bourbon Street. Like all these things, I'm like, my first reaction is, it doesn't make sense to me. Like something's weird here. Like, and it's like, okay, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it is just a example, a situation where just somebody who lost their mind, going crazy, did something insane, did something not rational. I have a good friend of mine who's a detective, and we were talking about the shooting, and he's like, you know what? He's like, as a detective, sometimes you find yourself just come to the conclusion that I'm trying to um, be rational with something that's not rational, and it's like sometimes it is just a crazy situation, and you're trying to make sense of it, and you're trying to make sense of something that doesn't make sense, and I'm like, yeah, but when the government's involved and everything seems to be a psyop. I was talking about that Chase Hughes podcast on Patrick Bet David recently, and he talked about something. Actually, one of the few weird CIA operations I've never heard of. It was called Operation Wandering Soul. Have you ever heard about this?
No, no.
It was crazy. So apparently, during Vietnam, the Vietnamese believed there's something about their culture about like what happens to people when they die. Like if you don't bury them, then their souls still wander, right? So the CIA and the military knew this. So they tapped into their radio and did fake ghost sounds and like you made it seem like it was the souls of the Vietnamese soldiers who died talking, and they would say things like, if we only surrendered, I'd still be with my family," like stuff like that. And so
Uh,
think about the length they went to do something like this. And I'm just like, if like there's no psyop, there's no operation that is too crazy for me to believe because of you uncover things like that. Obviously, Operation Midnight Climax, which was linked to MK Ultra and all these other. I'm like, there is no length they won't go to for a control and manipulation and propaganda and all these things. And so to me, like all these things could be a psyop. It could, and maybe we don't quite understand. It's just like when we go to a war, it's like, I know they're lying to us about going to this war. I just haven't figured out why. And sometimes it takes time for the truth to get uncovered and figure those things out. But you know right away, like something's fishy here. And it's like all these little events recently. It's like there's something fishy here. Trump's going into becoming president on the 20th. There's all of a sudden there just seems to be chaos and initially I'm always like, if something doesn't make sense, there must be a reason why it doesn't make sense. Somebody's lying to us. Somebody's deceiving us. The healthcare shooter, even that, like he shot a CEO. He didn't even have that health insurance, and he comes from a super wealthy family. Okay, that a super wealthy family that if he did need some back surgery, like the media's trying to tell you he needs, then he could afford to get it. Like I don't see, and his mother didn't even have. So it's like, okay, what's the agenda in that, And then there wasn't any. It's funny because there was no. Every time there's a mass shooting, the left is always like gun rights, guns, or we need to remove gun, and it's like there's no conversation about guns in this story, and it would just again fishy and weird and
yeah, yeah.
so there's like and now there's all this conversation about health insurance and stuff like that. I'm like, okay, maybe they're trying to roll out, universal basic income or universal healthcare, which I'm not. You live in a country that has it, right, Monaco?
Yeah. Well, Monaco is on the French system,
Which is
and yeah, so you have universal healthcare, and it works pretty well. And You don't even think about it. If you have to go to a hospital and have some kind of an intervention or get some medicine or a checkup, whatever, it costs a nominal amount. Nobody sweats over it. Nobody wonders, should I go to a doctor or shall I tough it out? It's a non-issue. It's really a non-issue. And I think that in the United States, it's again one of those things that are framed in a deliberately inappropriate way, because they've created this dichotomy where some people say there should be a universal healthcare, and then they label them, you're socialist, you're communist, whatever. And then there's other people who say like, no, 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 it should all be private. Uh, and then these first people say the healthcare is a human right, and the other ones say like, no, it's not. Well, it's a stupid debate. Healthcare is and always has been and always will be a social obligation, not a right. So when somebody's not okay in your family, you take care of them. If somebody is not care in your community, you have the obligation to take care of them. And it's not an obligation that's just imposed by some outside authorities. That's how we're wired. If you walk down the street and you see a dog drowning, your inclination is to jump in the water and save the dog. Or if you see a child, you know, we are made like that. We want to help, and people sometimes risk their own lives to rescue, not just another person, but an animal, a puppy, a kitten. Um, and we are phenomenally productive societies in at this stage. We should be able to afford to make sure that everybody is okay. The system is completely off kilter. It's kind of gone off the rails, and then it's just gotten entrenched deeper and deeper in solutions that clearly are extremely costly and have extremely poor outcomes. So American healthcare is the most expensive one in the world, and it has the worst outcomes of all healthcare systems in the world. So obviously something's very wrong, but you're not even allowed to talk about it because the debate is forcing you into one of these categories. Either you're a communist or you have to stay faithful to this neocon idea that, oh no, everybody for himself, and if you can't afford it, then just freaking die. It's not right. It's not correct.
Well, it's
But
it's not right when we live in a world where it's not because of a lack of resources. That's the thing that drives me crazy
yeah,
is
exactly.
it's not like we can't afford to do it. It's not like we can't afford taking care of one another. And it's like if we can, then why don't we all control? I mean that the paved roads, right? Like there's so many socialistic uh ideas that we buy into and are okay with without even thinking about it. Like, paved roads, the postal service, like all these things. Not to say that there's plenty of examples that a private sector doing a better job than a public sector. I get it. But like there are people in America who we talked about credit card bills, like have to use credit cards to pay their medical bills, to basically like, they get sick and then they're screwed basically for life because they have this crazy debt. So it's like, is our system better? And most of the time, the system's always going to be some way molded and created to benefit somebody, and it's usually not us. So it's like somebody's making money off it.
Yeah, but even this like idea that private sector always does a better job than the state sector, it's a big lie. It's just simply not true. I grew up in the socialist system. Some of the systems that we had, like to give you the example of the postal system in former Yugoslavia, it was absolutely superb. It was absolutely superb. I mean, I could get a letter sent, let's say, today at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and have it in my mailbox tomorrow morning at 10. And I'm talking about normal mail, which cost nothing. Just put stamp on the thing, put it in a mailbox, boom, 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 it was there. When I was in the military, I was stationed for 3 months on an island, which was the farthest island south on the Adriatic Sea. So it was really remote. It had one ferry connection a day to the mainland. And some of the soldiers in my unit, their family had a vineyard. And so they would send them like that plastic jug with 20 liters of wine from time to time, right? So what they did is they would just write the address of our barracks on the white in a blue marker on this white jug, take it to the post office. We had it literally within 48 hours. And I'm talking a small village on the opposite side of the country to the island that only had one ferry connection a day to military barracks there. The system worked beautifully well. Well, fast forward 30 years, we now have copy pasted the whole Western neoconservative system. Now we have UPS and DHL and private couriers and the state post office. All of them suck. All of them suck. Letters from major cities take 3 or 4 weeks. Sometimes they never arrive. Parcels sometimes arrive empty. Somebody empties them along the way. Another phenomenal thing that we had, which was just a systemic invention of our own postal system, is where the postal system acted as a paymaster and a collector. So let's say you started a business of like a postal business by catalog. You sold whatever by catalog, and then people could cut out a little order coupon, put it in the mail, and then you send them the whatever they ordered, and then you paid the postman. So let's say, I don't know, you buy an iPhone, it's $500. You give $500 to the postman upon receipt, and then the merchant receives the $500 from the post office. So the post office was like an early version of internet commerce and credit, not credit card, but you could
Like pay?
many people developed nice businesses by catalog on the back of the postal system. It was state run. And then, it wasn't such an exception, because if you go to countries like China, Japan, Switzerland, they all have government operated railway systems, which are, legendary for their efficiency and punctuality and comfort and all of this. I lived in Switzerland for 3 years, and literally their train system, you can get from anywhere to anywhere on a train. It's very reasonable. It's very safe, convenient, clean, comfortable, and so forth. And it's all run by the state. It's not private. And then in England, when they privatized the railways, they destroyed them. They completely suck. They suck so bad they're going to have to be nationalized again. Not only that, they're receiving massive subsidies from the government, because otherwise they wouldn't be able to stay in operation. And the fares have become extremely expensive compared to what they were. And the way in which they persuade us to accept this idea that everything private is awesome is because everything has to be profitable, right? If you're profitable, then you're legitimate and you have the right to exist. If you're a loss-making company, then obviously something's wrong and you should either improve your operations or disappear or be bought out or whatever. But the point of certain kinds of services in society and the infrastructure is that they lower the cost of transactions for everybody in society. So, whether the post office itself is running with a profit or running at a loss is ultimately irrelevant to society. If they run at a loss, okay, let the state subsidize them. It doesn't matter. But if you could take a parcel or a sample or a piece of merchandise to a post office, have it delivered to your friend, family, client, whoever, and it doesn't cost very much, and you know that they will have it the next day or 2 days later, then that's a phenomenally important service to society. Whether that organization itself is profitable or not, it's not terribly important. When they build the Erie Canal between the east coast of the United States and the Great Lakes, it reduced the cost of trade between the Great Lakes area and the east coast of the United States by 90%. So all the trade that went back and forth on that relation became 90% cheaper to transact. How much was that? I don't know, but it was a lot more than the very company that operated the Erie Canal's profits or losses. That's like almost inconsequential to the whole. So, state can perfectly operate large system effectively and efficiently uh, if they have to, and if they're allowed to develop such systems. Private companies can just as perfectly ruin very nice business operations by loading them up with debt, by you know private enterprise goes for profits, which means that among other things you want to increase the prices to the extent that you can, and you want to lower the cost to the extent that you can, which means that you're not investing in maintenance, you're not investing in how do you call it, in people, in training, in you're not paying them well and so forth. So you end up getting crap. And a lot of, you just have to look around. A lot of privately run businesses are absolute crap.
And then the motive, like you kind of talked about it slightly about what motivates the company to do the work, right? That's also can be a big issue because a government company, maybe they don't have the motive to go fast, but they do have the motive to do the job correctly, where you see it in contracting, right? Like we do, if we do a state funded project or a city funded project, they got inspectors there. They got to make sure everything's done correctly. They those inspectors aren't trying, they don't care about, they're on salary, they're getting paid by the city or whatever, they might be a state employee. They just care about the job getting done the way that it was proposed in the plan. So if we want 4 inches of concrete, the contractor has to give us 4 inches of concrete, right? But then you go to like private sector where people do home, residential work. You hear horror story after horror story of people trying to cut corners, contractors cutting
Yeah.
corners, and it's because they're motivated by money, right? Compared to like a DPW or a city, like in a local city, they have their own. They take care of their own electric company. They have their own electric company. They take care of a lot of their own stuff, and it's kind of better off that way. Everything gets done right because it's all in the interest of this company that works for the city, that is a part of the city. It's a department of the city to take care of this stuff instead of paying a contractor to come in. Maybe they'll cut corners. Maybe they're trying to save money. They do this, do that. So incentive is also important. And contractors, everybody has this thing of like, oh well, government only gets in the way. And I'm like, not always, because it's like, don't get me wrong. Like, I think that we're way over the top with licenses and all this stuff. And a lot of them are money grabs. Like, hey, like you got to get this license to do this work. And then you got to get this other license to do that work or whatever, and I think that, some of it is a money grab, but to say that it's only bad and never good, like needing a licensed electrician probably isn't a bad idea. Like somebody who has proven that he knows what he's doing instead of somebody who's like, hey, I'm not a licensed electrician. I do it on the side, whatever. And the next thing you know, the house burns down because they messed up, right? So there's a little bit of confidence that comes with that, I think. So there's, the thing is, like you said, a lot of these issues, it's like every issue in the world. Like you have to pick a team, and your team has to always be right. And if the other team makes a valid point, you need to rebut it instead of acknowledging it. And that's a huge issue with everything. Like it makes it to me, my first indication that like I can't have a civil conversation or logical conversation with somebody is that if I make a point and instead of acknowledging it, they try to rebut it. Like it's, and I do like I try to, if I'm having a discussion with somebody and I disagree with them, if they make a valid point, it doesn't matter if them making a valid point helps them in this disagreement. I'm still going to acknowledge it's a valid point. I'm like, that is a valid point. You're right. Actually, I can completely, and too often people don't do that. And this is the same thing. Like private's not always better than public. This libertarian view of the world where like you just have everything private and it's going to fix itself. I don't think
Oh, it's simply false. It just doesn't work that way. You just have to open your eyes and see it. It's almost everywhere. I mean, it's
well, and you understand.
I'll give you an example of the experience that we had in Croatia. Again, at some point we just copy pasted everything from the West, the ideology and the systems and everything. And among other things, we sold off the trash collecting business to private corporations, right? So before it used to be the state that was in charge of picking up the garbage and taking it somewhere. I don't know where they take it. As far as I'm concerned, it's magic. I leave it there and then it disappears. That's all I knew about it. It wasn't an issue ever. Then they sold it off to the private companies who then decided like, oh, we're picking up trash at too many points, which means that the trash collecting people, we need too many of them, too many trucks, too many work hours. So we're just going to reduce the number of pickup points. So now they employed everybody else to have to carry their trash farther to the dumpsters, right? So now we all started working for the trash company. And then they started, instead of picking up trash every day, which is the way it was done before, they started picking up once a week. Okay. So they pick it up once a week. And the place where my family has where we live, we have a house. It's actually a tourist resort. And so, in the summer, summer is the tourist season. And in the summer, if you leave trash in the heat for a whole week, it reeks. It really stinks. It's not a nice thing for a tourist resort to, every, half a mile, it smells like there's a corpse somewhere in the bushes. And so that's a problem. But it makes the trash collection company more profitable because they only have to send out the trucks once a week rather than every day. So, lower cost for them. And then they started rationing the trash and say like, okay, so if you dump more, then you have to buy. Then they forced everybody into buying dumpsters, and you have to buy a small one, which is less. If you dump a lot of trash, you have to buy a big one. So this. So all of a sudden, dumping trash became an issue, and people started feeling the expense. And then, so what do people do? They cheat. They take their, like around on the street, you have the trash cans for, like when you have a piece of paper that you don't just throw it on the street, you have these trash cans, right? Well, people started putting their domestic trash into those trash cans because it's free, right? So what started happening is that the trash overflows. So now again, in the tourist resort, you have trash overflowing, a little bit of wind and it goes everywhere. Well, there's a bigger problem too, because then that attracts the flies and maggots and then ultimately rats and all kinds of stuff. And now you potentially have an infectious disease risk with this. And so privatizing this particular business has been nothing but disaster. So, like any libertarian wants to have a debate with me about how everything private is automatically super awesome. I can give them the example of trash in Croatia, in addition to the example of trains in England. It's just simply not true. You have to, you know,
Well,
if we want to fix the parts of our societies that are dysfunctional, we have to look at the things as they are, and we have to look at systems according to what they produce, not according to what ideology tells us that they should produce or what we wish that they would produce. We have to look at things as they are. We know that the Chinese and the Japanese and the Swiss have these railway networks that are perfectly functional, and they're state run, and they work wonderfully. The postal systems, the water systems, the trash collection systems, the healthcare and so forth, it can all work really well as a part of social service infrastructure, and it should, because then it would be available to all, it would be inexpensive, and with the insane surplus and productivity that we have in society, even if some of these companies were loss makers, so freaking what? It's a drop in the bucket.
and then you hear the ridiculous argument of they'll pick a country that has plenty of other reasons on why it wasn't successful. And they say, hey, look, it was a socialist country and look what happened to Venezuela, or look what happened and it's like, are we just going to pretend there wasn't all these other reasons why certain countries are failing or doing poorly?
Yeah, and I also lived in Venezuela back in 1993 when it was very much a capitalist country under a U.S. Puppet regime of Carlos Andres Perez. It was just as dysfunctional as it is today, maybe more dysfunctional. I don't know. I worked there, and I had colleagues who were illiterate at work. Most of my colleagues at work lived in the slums. Okay. 80% of the whole population was under the World Bank poverty line, and the country is phenomenally wealthy. So, what's so awesome about that? People, when it comes to this debate of capitalism versus socialism, it's like nothing else I've known, that people so readily align themselves with one ideological camp or the other, and then they just defend their views. They're not interested in the nitty-gritty and the nuances of the argument. They just I swear to God, I was in a conference last year in Dubai. It was some investment club. Great people, really good people, smart and so on. But by the end of the conference, they were like, "Ah, you're a communist." I'm not a communist. I grew up in communism. I know what it is. I was never in favor of it. But, it's not that everything was dysfunctional. Some things were very dysfunctional. And so, if the same thing might function really, really well under state direction and in a communist system, and then that same system malfunctions in private hands in a capitalist system, then it's not a function of ideology. Something else is making it function well or not function well. And one of the things that I discovered is that it has a lot to do with human motivations, because sometimes work is done right because people doing the work want to do a good job. People actually take pride in the job that they do. And my best friend in the army, his father worked for the postal company, right? And he wasn't particularly well paid, and he didn't have a university education. He was just a technician with like the lifetime with the company. And little by little, he became they put him in charge of the telephone switchboard for the city. And so at one point in the mid 1990s, they decided to move the city switchboard from the center of the town to the periphery. Okay. And they assigned him the project of moving it. And they said, like, you have to move the switchboard but not a single call can fail. And so for several months, this was a whole story in his family. For several months, his dad was working like 12, 14, 16-hour days. He was very stressed. He was working exceptionally hard. But in the end, he managed. He moved the whole switchboard to a new location, and not a single phone call failed. And I thought, like, well, he didn't get a bonus. He didn't get $1 million salary. Nothing of the sort. He just continued. He got a pat on the shoulder from his bosses, and maybe he did get a little bonus or something, a gift from the company. But like he wasn't going to make millions of dollars. He wasn't going to buy a house with a swimming pool or anything like that. He just wanted to do a good job because that was reflection of him as a professional at a job to which he dedicated his whole life. So he wanted to do a good job. That's that. That's simple. And there's that in people. That's real. We're not all about money and exclusively all about money. And so only a system that incentivizes us with these piles of millions and millions of dollars, only then is the system going to work well.
And honestly, I think a lot of our world issues are due to the pursuit of profit over anything else. And it, look at our food, right? We talk about our food. I could have a libertarian in the room, a capitalist in the room, and we could talk about like, hey, our food in America sucks, right? Like we have all these chemicals that, I use this app called Yuka, Yuka, and you can scan a barcode on food, and it'll tell you the preservatives that are in there and how risky they are, and whatnot. It'll give you a rating, and I scan stuff that I get from the local butcher shops where they sell Portuguese products from overseas, and you scan it, and it's like chocolate cereal, good rating, no preservatives, no none. Same chocolate looking cereal in America, and it has all these bad things in it. And it's like, okay, we all agree on that, but will a libertarian or a capitalist come to the conclusion or ever highlight the fact that capitalism is one of the reasons why those fillers are in there, the reason why those preservatives are in there, because for quarterly gains, for profit, it makes more sense to give you less food and more chemicals and more preservatives, so the stuff has a longer shelf life and it lasts longer and all this other stuff. So it's like there's plenty of examples of like capitalism actually doing horrible things, too. But you have to acknowledge both sides. That the perfect system is neither one or the other. It's probably going to be a mix of a lot of different ideologies and ideas, and there's going to be times that it doesn't work and other times it does work, and it's constantly problem solving and trying to figure it out. But like the thing that we talked about before that I think is so important is, and this is where like I think the capitalistic libertarian type of point of view becomes a little dangerous. It's like, okay, I'm all for like all of us kind of like, just motivating people to go do the best they can and don't let government get in the way. And, if government doesn't get in the way, we'll start businesses and all these great things will happen. But that's if everybody's kind of starts at the same place. But unfortunately, there's going to be a lot of people who need a little bit more help. People who come from really shitty situations. Like you said, maybe you come from a family, your parents divorced, they talk trash about each other, you have all this trauma from their fighting or whatever, and you have a hard time, finding happiness or finding a job that's fulfilling or whatever. Like, so there's all these other things. And if we have a world where we have a ridiculous amount of resources, we have a world where we can all contribute and we all can be a little bit better off, you know, why not? But I guess the counter argument, and I've talked about this on the show before, is we also understand the dangers of government. And you coming from a communist country, I'm sure you've seen some of that. Most people during COVID saw a lot of that, right? Where it's just, hey, you give the government all this power. They can cut off your food. They can tell you like, hey, if you want to go to work and feed your family and pay your bills, you got to get this COVID shot. You got to do this, or you got to let us track you. You got to let us do all. So it's like everything is isn't black or white. There's a lot of gray in the middle, and but I do think like libertarians and these capitalists, like I think their heart's in the right place in most cases, where it's like they do, con they're concerned about the overreach of government and how obvious it is and how just over the top it is that it's like, hey, if you just keep giving them more power, that's only going to lead to more control. And then the more control they have over us, and like we were talking about before, like once you're on that government tit, then you know what? You're gonna basically do whatever they say so you can keep getting that money. If they're paying for my health care, if they're paying for my groceries, if they're paying for my electricity, if they're paying for everything, then it's like I don't want to piss them off. I want to keep these things, right? Where if you have independence and you're making your own money and you're doing things on your, then maybe you have a likelihood of maybe not not going along with the government narrative every time. What's your thoughts?
Well, it's not just the government. One of the easy ways that we can get into trouble, even if you're your own person, you have your own business, you're making your own money. It's very easy today to get unbanked, and then you realize where it's at. It's not government doing to you; it's the banks doing it to you. I I went to a I went to a bank a few weeks ago, and I wanted to make a transfer. And they started asking me, well, what do you want to make this transfer for? And I borrowed some money from my cousin, because I needed it for to move. And I said, well, I borrowed some money from this person and I want to reimburse them. And they said, like, well, where's your loan agreement? I said, she's my cousin. I said, oh, well, yeah, but we don't know that. Anyway, the story got so ridiculous. I mean, ridiculous beyond belief. That they were like, well, we need a letter from them with a copy of a passport and in English, and they have to explain to us. They just have to tell us that yes, they indeed lent you some money. And I said, but you see in the transfer a few months ago that some money came in from that person to me, and I want to pay them. No, they needed a loan agreement, or they needed her to write a letter. And I was like, excuse me, are you my bank or is this a Gestapo? And by this time, no less than four bank clerks were around me, telling me how it is. Talk about efficiency also. This is a private bank, right? So these people have all the time on their hands to there be aggravating a client. And then there was one woman among these four who actually had a sense of humor, and she was like, "No, we're the Gestapo." The days of helpful and courteous bank managers that you remember, that's long gone. We are the Gestapo. And then one of them finally got embarrassed enough that they told me, "Look, if you just make this in a few transfers online, then you don't have to declare anything. Just, instead of reimbursing her all in once, just make a few payments and then it's going to be fine." And so I left. But, at one point I said, like, well, what if I don't want to do this? What if I say no? What if I just like ask you to make this? They said, well, we can throw you out. We can unbank you. And then it's not like you're going to take your money and go to the next bank, because they have a database now where if you get blacklisted by one bank, you're blacklisted in the system. You're going to have a really, really difficult time finding any bank. And so now, if they unbanked you, your business is gone. Like I can no longer, the credit card payments, the this and that, it all stops. So your business, and it's not the government, it's the banks, and they're private institutions for profit. Super awesome, right? But they're treating their clients like they like I'm their serf, literally. So that's my thought. And then the other thought about having grown up in the communist world, Of course, there were problems, but I think that the worst that I could say about our government back in those days is that they were inefficient, they were corrupt, and they were often incompetent, but they were never vicious. There wasn't. I think that people in government were still people who lived in the same communities, you know, so their children ate and drank water where they lived, and they went to school with other children of the same community. So in a sense, they didn't feel like everybody else was a lower life form and that they could be bossy and vicious as the state apparatchiks. So it was relatively easy to get around all the rules and regulations. It was relatively easy to cheat the system when you needed something. And the only thing that was not great is that your opportunities in life were severely curtailed because there was no credit. There was no, like you might have a business idea and you were allowed to have a private business. It wasn't like everybody had to work for the state. You could start a private, restaurant, construction company, whatever. It was just extremely difficult to get funding, to get credit. So the only people who ran private businesses are people who could, you know, uh, fund them out of their own pockets, or had family abroad, or had family members who were, people who made good money, were people who worked in the merchant marine. So, you had to find a friend to borrow money from to start a business. But if you started a business and you were successful, it was a good life, and the government really wasn't, vicious or violent, or that people were not being tortured or killed in prisons, like happens routinely in England, for example, in the UK. None of that. None of that.
It's funny you say that because I'm curious if the founding fathers of the U.S., when they came to this conclusion that it's much smarter to have states have much more power than the federal government, if that was also a contributor to their logic. This idea of like, well, if you're running the state that you live in, then the corruption and scandals can only do so much harm before it starts affecting your own community, your own loved ones, your own, so maybe it will restrict, some of that corruption and scandalous stuff that happens behind the scenes, and the bad stuff that happens with government, um, where the federal government, they could care less, right? If they screw Texas or they screw Dakota and they don't have any relationship, any connection to that state, you're like, who cares? Like, it doesn't, so I wonder if that was some of the thinking, and it does seem like it makes sense because even in local governments nearby, there's always stories of like this person getting paid off, this person doing this, but it's like it's always stuff that like it doesn't harm the overall city or doesn't harm the community to a certain extent. Maybe financially it might hurt somebody, but it's not like you said, it's not vicious where like they're poisoning everybody, or stuff like that. So it makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, and I think also, say you're doing a poor job running South Carolina, people start moving to North Carolina, you're going to notice, because businesses are going to be moving out and your tax receipts are going to be shrinking. So maybe, you're going to have to change how you run the place. Um, yeah, I think there's a lot of wisdom, but unfortunately, the United States has been pretty much hijacked by the imperial powers, from the undead British Empire. And I think that ever since World War One, and even before that, the United States has been slowly but steadily infiltrated and co-opted to become the the enforcement arm of the Western imperial oligarchy. So, that's why, you have how many, 800, 900 military bases all around the world. They don't benefit American people in the slightest, but, you know, they're there because the Western banks have to control all the resources around the world to make sure that they are their collateral so that they can use that collateral to extend loans to companies like JP Morgan and, you know, Halliburton and who not.
Yeah, well, that's why we changed it to the Department of Defense, not the Department of War, because it was a great PR move. So, and then it sounds like all those bases are there to defend us. We're not attacking people.
Yeah, because that's what the freedom is. That's where they drill the freedom out of.
Well, Alex, I've taken up a lot of your time. I'm sure you're a busy man with a lot to do. Well, let's make sure the next one isn't so far in the future. Let's reconnect soon again. And there's always endless amounts of things to talk about. One thing I love about talking to you is that this conversation can go anywhere. And I'm sure people did not well, you did not expect a parenting and marriage advice show today, but
Yeah, I know. I have to say it's a little bit of a refreshment because the geopolitics and war and Trump versus Biden is saturating the conversations to such an extent that it's actually refreshing to talk about something else. It's almost, I sometimes think when the world will be okay again, we'll be able to have conversations about normal things. And so, maybe who knows, in 7 days' time, we should have a new president in the White House. So maybe we're beginning to chill out a little bit already that our conversation veered off of the usual staple over the last 4 years.
yeah, well, I think it's so often we talk about how people need to zoom out, right? They need to zoom out and see the big picture. Like people are so caught up in their own personal lives that it's like zoom out, look at all these agendas and all these things. And I think like that's important, but I think it's also important to sometimes to zoom in and realize like behind all these things, there's people who have personal issues and personal struggles, everything like you said from like relationships with your kids to a wife or husband to your relationship with your friends and all these things. And like all these things contribute to the way we live our lives and how we communicate. And, and all these people are dealing with these things. Sometimes people don't talk about it. So they might be listening to the podcast and like, hey, all Ricky and Alex talks about is geopolitics and history and whatnot. So, they might be in a perfect, life outside of the podcast because they're not talking about struggles with keeping the relationship alive or struggles with trying to figure out the right way of parenting and all these other things. It's like no, we're all dealing with these struggles, and it's important to talk about because it's the same reason why we like depressing music. It kind of reminds you like, hey, I'm not the only one who feels down from time to time. So I think it is important sometimes to share some of these personal experiences and journeys and learn from each other's just I guess wisdom that we've extracted from our bumps in the road.
Amen.
Thanks, Alex. Hey, take care. I'll send you links to the show once it's up and live, and we'll hopefully reconnect in the near future.
I look forward to that, Ricky. Thank you for having me, and until the next time.
Thanks, Alex. Take care.
All
Ciao.
the best. Take care. Bye bye.